from winning a college football national championship to stepping into the cage as an MMA fighter. This is my journey, but trust me, this wasn't the plan. I lost myself, I struggled to find my way, and I had to rebuild myself from the ground up. Here's how it happened. They always tell you, you're not just a football player, you're a student athlete. You're more than just a football player. But when you've been playing since you were 9 years old and your entire life is built around the game, it's hard to see yourself doing anything else. From the time I was a kid until I was 23 years old, all I wanted to be was a football player and play in the NFL. Football was my identity. Then, one day, it was just over. December 2019, my last game. After that, nothing. No practices, no team meetings, no locker room, no structure. I went from knowing exactly who I was to having no direction whatsoever. I remember being in class when football ended, thinking to myself, what am I doing here? Then I end up leaving class early to eventually just skipping class altogether. Then that turned into using the pandemic as yet another excuse for me to drop out of school. Stressful doesn't justify the roller coaster I was going through during that time of my life. I wasn't just trying to find something to do. I was trying to figure out who I was in general as a person without the game of football attached to my name. In March 2020, the pandemic shut down UWF. We were supposed to finish up the semester virtually. I was so messed up mentally that I just gave up on college altogether. I didn't have a plan or any direction. I just felt lost. There were two positive people in my life that kept me going. First was my son, Caden. He was only 2 years old at the time. Second was that I met Casey, who 3 years later became my wife. For my own sanity, I desperately needed something. Somehow, I got interested in boxing. The first day I walked into the boxing gym, I didn't have the slightest idea of what I was doing, but I really enjoyed it. It gave me that structure again, something to work toward, and something to get better at. I wasn't always consistent, but when I had fights coming up, I was locked in. I had 2 boxing fights, one in 2020 and one in 2021, but as much as I enjoyed the sport, I wasn't fully committed the way I needed to be. I needed a real job to pay bills and support my son. Casey was in my life, but I couldn't depend on her for everything. We were only dating at the time, but we did decide to move in together and get an apartment. So now I need to take care of my family. That's when I started driving for Uber, DoorDash, and Lyft. Eventually, I became a cadet at the local sheriff's office, and I graduated from the police academy in November 2022. Once I finished the police academy, I knew that being a deputy wasn't for me. The hours I would work conflicted with the times I would need to pick up and drop off Caden to and from school. A part of it morally just didn't sit well with me, but the academy gave me confidence to go back to school and finish up my bachelor's. There were many other cadets who had their bachelor's and a few had their master's, and I was doing just as well as them in every part of the academy. My thought was like, if they can get their bachelor's, I know I can get mine too. So in November 2022, I became a substitute teacher and enrolled back at UWF for the spring of 2023. Around that same time, my son wanted to start wrestling. I'd take him to practice, and every day the coaches would invite me to stay for the adult class. I always had an excuse. I was in my work clothes and I wasn't prepared. Then one day I didn't have work. I showed up in my gym clothes and they called me out. You don't have an excuse this time. So they handed me a pair of wrestling shoes and I got on the mat. And for the first time wrestling, I actually did pretty well. So that moment stuck with me. In February 2023, my wife and I got married. A few weeks later, we had a real in-depth conversation about me going all in with MMA. Between my boxing experience and my natural feel for wrestling and the love of guys I had trained with over the past 3 years, I started thinking and believing that I had real potential in MMA. My wife said, if you're going to do it, then go all in for it. So in March 2023, I made the full commitment, full time, no more kind of training, no more half in, half out. I was all in. Between the time of making that commitment in my first fight, I finished up my bachelor's degree and graduated from UWF in August of 2023. In October 2023, I became a fourth grade teacher, and in February of 2024, my wife and I celebrated our first anniversary together. About a month later, March 30th, 2024, I had my first MMA fight. When I had my first fight, it wasn't some big emotional moment where I felt like I had finally arrived. It was just the next step. Another challenge, another competition. I was locked in and just ready to perform, just like I had been in football. I spent an entire year training before I ever stepped into the cage. Every day, I was sharpening my skills, wrestling, striking, jiu-jitsu, conditioning, just putting in the work. I was eager to jump in the cage, but my coach wouldn't let me rush it. When fight night finally came, I wasn't second guessing anything. I had already put in all the work. All that was left was to show up and perform. Winning wasn't the peak, it wasn't proof of anything, it was just another lesson, another step forward. And that's what keeps me going, the process, the improvement, the grind. I'm not chasing some perfect moment, I'm just chasing greatness, and greatness will come as long as I put in the work. This journey isn't about proving something to anyone. It's been about perseverance, testing myself, and pushing myself through the hard times on the mats, in the cage, and even in life as a husband, father, and teacher. This is my journey, and I'm just getting started. Subscribe to follow the journey. Astro. Good boy. Come on.